Hey YouTubers, it's Charlie. This is going to be my Game of Thrones video all about the Long Night, and we're going to have to do a brief history of a timeline of major events in the world. I don't think it needs a spoiler alert because we're talking about things that happened way long time ago before the events on the show. So here we go. There is a new round of the giveaway too, and because the Season 5 DVD is coming out, it's going to be a gift certificate for the DVD or the Blu-ray, whichever one you guys want. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave a comment on this video. I'll just announce the winner whenever I post my next Game of Thrones video. So here we go. Jon Snow spoke that ominous warning in the Season 6 teaser. It's actually a line of dialogue that he had already spoken on the show. The long night is coming. A never-ending winter that covers the entire planet. Remember, seasons in Game of Thrones, the seasons of Planetos, the planet of Game of Thrones, that's what they call the Earth in Game of Thrones, or indeterminate. I'm sure there's a scientific explanation for that, but because magic exists in Game of Thrones, gods exist, there's a supernatural aspect that we just haven't learned about yet. Hopefully George R. R. Martin will explain some of the particulars at a certain point, but the bad news is I'm not expecting the show to spell that out anytime soon. Usually the show finds more value in the things that it doesn't explain because it lets us come up with these really grand ideas in our heads, and those are usually more fantastic than whatever explanation the show would give us. But in Season 1, there's that line of dialogue, "Oh, sweet summer child, you don't know anything of winter," speaking specifically of the Sansa character, just like the soul of innocence at that point. Winter's coming, it's gotten here now. Jon Snow has seen the horrors that are coming with it. Hopefully we'll see some ice spiders too. We haven't seen ice spiders, but a lot of the really cool details about the Long Night come from the expanded books. So if you really like Game of Thrones history, you should definitely check out World of Ice and Fire. It's only partially written by George R. R. Martin, but because it does have his stamp of approval and he wrote new material for it, the stuff that they talk about is canon to the series. And unlike the main novels, it talks about what happened during that period, but it's usually in a roundabout way, with characters thinking about things that happened, because even though the Maesters were created around that period, the validity of history recorded during that period is kind of in question. It's not like they had digital records or anything like that. And the Maesters didn't become a thing until House Hightower became their patrons. During the Age of Heroes, there are several mythical people that are said to be the progenitors of House Stark, House Lannister, people like Garth Greenhand, mythical people that are believed to have lived around the same time, but because dates are so fuzzy, you just have to take it on faith. But they were all the first men. This is before the Andal invasion. So we're talking about 10,000 years ago. And I'll talk about the timeline of major events in just a second, because the Long Night is about 8,000 years ago. Already you start to see some inconsistencies. But when the wall was built at the end of the Long Night by Bran the Builder, there was a maester at the wall. And as we learn from Tyrion, who prowls the Citadel looking for information on dragons, not all of the Citadel's information on history is complete. There's always a lot of missing books. But one of the other big centers for knowledge in the world that we haven't seen yet is the place that Melisandre comes from, Asshai. Hopefully we'll see it on the show at some point, but I'm not expecting it because it's so far east. But you get the idea. Even though people were alive during the Long Night recording history, a lot of the history that has survived to today is unreliable. So you're not really sure what to believe, but legends talk about the last hero, the pack with the children of the forest, the value of obsidian in fighting White Walkers and the minions of the Great Other. So if history repeats itself, George R. R. Martin's really big on history repeating itself in A Song of Ice and Fire, then thematically, a lot of the same things will be happening. There'll be a hero, there'll be an alliance, and there will be a terrible winter that will descend on Westeros. When Daenerys had the vision in the House of the Undying about standing in the Iron Throne Room with snow falling and the roof being torn off like it had been destroyed, that kind of winter to King's Landing will probably come to pass, even if it doesn't go down exactly the way she saw it. Visions, like recorded history from the period of the Long Night 8,000 years ago, are unreliable. Do not take them literally. When it comes to the history of the realm though, now we have Bran, who is capable of weirwood visions, and the weirwoods are some of the oldest living things on the planet, so there might be a combination of ways in which the show addresses history like the Long Night, but the producers, the writers, wouldn't tell you about something that is coming on the show without ever intending to do it. So I do think that we will see a version of the Long Night during Season 6, probably just in a really brief vision. Remember, there's 2 more seasons, and I feel like they would save that nuclear winter for the last season. Now there's all kinds of questions about the White Walkers, the Great Other, what their powers are. Did they bring the Long Night, or is it just part of climate change? I've already mentioned World of Ice and Fire. It talks about some of the other big cultures in history having different tales for what brought about the Long Night. Each one is kind of a variation on the Azor Ahai legend. Of all the religions in the world, the Red God is one of the oldest. It's the one that names Azor Ahai as its mythic savior figure. All the other cultures of the world have similar tales, they just have a different name for Azor Ahai. In all of them, there is a mythic savior figure, there is something resembling the Long Night, so do not be surprised when history repeats itself. I feel like we've all been building towards this on the show, even though they haven't really explored all these other cultures. In the Westerosi legends of the Long Night, the last hero was the person who made contact with the Children of the Forest and was able to learn from them that obsidian would hurt the White Walkers, and that's what turned the tide in the battle and helped end the Long Night. So of all the people on the TV show, there's one person, Bran, who has already made contact with the Children of the Forest, or at least one child of the Forest. Not many of them are left alive. And I also feel like Jon Snow could be another person to go into the North and seek their help. That's why last year when people were asking me, like, do you think that Ser Jorah is Azor Ahai? I totally laughed. I started laughing so hard. If you dig into a lot of the expanded material that goes way beyond what Old Nan talks about in The Long Night, then it's a lot easier to guess who Azor Ahai might end up being. So even if Daenerys winds up bringing all those Dothraki, all the people from Slaver's Bay, her dragons, everybody from the east to fight in the War for the Dawn, I still feel like history is going to repeat itself and things will go down relatively the similar way. Like the Azor Ahai, the mythical savior figure, will be the one to treat with Children of the Forest and learn all about White Walkers. Here's my big question for you guys. Let me know in the comments, who do you think Azor Ahai is? And do you think that we're going to see a vision of the Long Night in Season 6? It kind of feels disingenuous for them to tell us about it and then not show it. Like when they showed us the dragon eggs in Season 1, we saw actual dragons in the season finale. So if you're going to tease the Long Night, I feel like you have to show it in a vision sometime during Season 6. But I'd be really surprised if they sped things up super fast and we actually saw it snowing in King's Landing. I'm not expecting that to happen this season. Maybe they'll tease it in the finale. But just for fun, here's a brief history of the realm, mostly focused on Westeros in the east. Before the coming of the First Men, the Children of the Forest inhabited Westeros. That was more than 12,000 years ago. The First Men supposedly invaded Westeros about 12,000 years ago, crossing using the Arm of Dorne. That led to a war between the First Men and the Children of the Forest, at the end of which the Children of the Forest shattered the Arm of Dorne using their magic. Then about 4,000 years after that, the others emerged from the lands of Always Winter, and thus began the Long Night. They don't really give a timeline, they just say that the Long Night lasted for a generation. So you could say 100 years, you could say 60 years. Around the end of that, the Wall is built, the Night's Watch is founded, the 13th Lord Commander becomes the mythical Night's King. There's no real official date on that. But then about 2,000 years after that, the Andals founded the Faith of the Seven. Then over the next 2,000 years, the Andals invaded Westeros and started conquering all the First Men. About 1,000 years after the Andal invasion, the Valyrian freehold rose up, the Valyrians tamed dragons and conquered the east. Then 120 years before Aegon's conquest, the Targaryens migrated to Dragonstone after one of Aenar Targaryen's daughters had a vision of the Doom of Valyria. The actual Doom of Valyria didn't happen until about 8 years after their migration. Then about 300 years before the stuff that's happening on the show right now was Aegon's conquest. Aegon conquered the 7 kingdoms, really 6 kingdoms because he wasn't able to conquer Dorne. They didn't become an official part of the kingdom till much, much later. And that by no means is like a complete grand history of the realm, but it's a pretty big picture of some of the bigger events. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that they spell out in the novels, so depending on what the show does, I'll definitely do more bonus videos for the big events in history. I know you're all wondering when the full trailer's coming for Season 6. A lot of people think that it's going to be the date the DVD is released. That's on March 15th, so it's a couple weeks away, but that's the most likely candidate for the first full Season 6 trailer, with actual footage from Season 6. I know that seems a long ways away, but there's plenty of Game of Thrones Season 6 stuff happening. They've been doing a better job of marketing the show this year than they did last year. While you guys wait for my next video, you can click here for all my Game of Thrones Season 6 videos, and you can click here to catch up on Walking Dead before tonight's episode. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Let's high five. I'll see you guys tonight.